All right, so should we begin? Okay, so we've covered just various topics. We haven't really stuck to one field. Should I sit here, or should I? Yeah, it's good enough. Everyone can hear me. It's been a couple months now since the last time I was here. But one of the customs which people have is to study Pirkei Avos during the summer months. Some people study it only between Passover and Shavuos. Others have the customs to study it all summer long. What is Pirkei Avos? It's the Jewish book of ethics. The foundation of the oral tradition is the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the source of the Talmud. The Mishnah is made up of many tractates. This is a tractate Shabbos. This is a tractate, just about any of Jewish law, Rosh Hashanah, but not only times of the year. There's a tractate called Teruma and Meiser, and so every single tractate talks about the practical laws and obligations and customs of Judaism. Every tractate that is, except for one. That's this one, the Book of Jewish Ethics, which doesn't include any mitzvahs. It doesn't include obligations. It just says, this is what you have to do to live life in accordance with, to live an ethical life. Because a person could follow the rules and still be unethical. A person can follow all the rules and yet find ways to technically be following the rules, but nevertheless be living a unethical life. There is a line in the, I forget who uses it, one of the famous commentaries says a person can be a obnoxious person with permission of Torah. In other words, still technically following everything, but using every possible way not to be a mensch. You hear that term a lot, be a mensch. So this is the book of how to be a mensch. And what are the Jewish values, not necessarily obligations, but what is the root of the Jewish value system. So that's the Pirkei Avos. It's a fascinating book. It's one of my favorite books, is Pirkei Avos. I use different commentaries, different explanations of the statements there. But it's, and there's 6 chapters in Pirkei Avos. Every chapter has a certain amount of Mishnahs, paragraphs. Each paragraph carries a world of wisdom. Before we get into it, I'd like to share perhaps a more timely issue. So today's an exciting day in my family. Today is the birthday of my oldest daughter. She is now the ripe old age of 6. And last week, I took our 2 older ones, our daughter who is now 6 and my son who's 4, and we took them to July 3rd to Cass Lake to watch fireworks. Very exciting. So fireworks don't start till like 10 p.m. They watched the fireworks, and then at the end of the fireworks, my wife turned to them and said, "So, what's the lesson you can take from fireworks? What's the lesson? You're supposed to learn a lesson in life from everything."
To a 6-year-old kid.
Yeah.
That's not fair.
It's not fair. In fact, my 6-year-old said, the lesson is that from now on we have to go to sleep early. That was her response. She was wiped out, she was tired, she had a great time, but we have to go to sleep early. And then I actually turned to my wife and said, it's a good question. What is the lesson that you can learn from fireworks? Any suggestions? You're not, people here are, it's a fair question to ask this group, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Any thoughts? Yes?
Perhaps you could get burned.
You get burned. You got a safety. Obligation of safety. And in fact, that's an interesting point because I was thinking a separate halachic question, which is the ethics of using fireworks. Earlier this year, we had a class, not here, about the Torah's obligation for safety. Are you obligated, according to Torah, to wear a seatbelt? This is a whole discussion. So the question is, there's all sorts of talk now about the safety or lack thereof of fireworks. Should it be legal? Should it not be legal? But putting aside the American legal system, does the Torah allow you or not? And I don't have an answer right now, right off the bat. But it's an interesting topic. But as a separate lesson, what is the lesson other than safety? But what's something unique which you can, something to derive, something mystical from the fireworks?
It's not a lesson to me, but how wonderful the invention and the act of man can do. We can take stuff from the ground and make this wonderful display. It's a wonderful thing.
True.
Man can do good too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
besides what it stands for in America, I think the fireworks start out slow. They're beautiful, but they continue to build to a
Okay.
great crescendo,
Oh,
And the
which
end
is
we saw some fireworks in
a bit
Tiberia,
like
no?
a
What?
bit like life.
Right.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so here's this is somewhat of a continuation of what you're saying, Robert. Is that Robert, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Raphael.
Raphael, angel of healing. So one of the it has somewhat of a continuation of that. So my wife suggested the following. She said, "What's unique about the fireworks is that you would seem, if you look at it, just watching them, you have what's like you see a single source of light rising, and then it explodes into many sources of light, many different. It starts going up. It's one light, and then boom." All of a sudden, variety of colors, but it's many different sources of light coming out. Today in the bank, I had a conversation with the teller. She wanted to know my name. I said, people always have a hard time with my name. My name is Schneur. So, I've been called every name possible based on the spelling of my name. She said, what is the meaning of your name? I said, Schneur means two sources of light. That's what it means, Schneur. Two sources of light. So she was thrilled. She was like, let me write this down. I'm going to go Sunday to my priest. I'm going to tell him I know Schneur, and I'm going to tell him. So, anyways, so one little bit of light explodes into much light. And that's a very beautiful idea. And certainly an idea which we believe in Judaism as well. In the very same book of ethics, not the Mishnah we'll talk about today, it says mitzvah gereres mitzvah.
So it's the tree of knowledge and life.
That a mitzvah causes another mitzvah to happen. And one little source of light, before you know it, can explode around. You don't even know the impact of the mitzvah you do and how much light it's going to cause. And I heard a beautiful story last week. I got an email. Maybe you saw it. As we're all very much aware of what happened and what's continuing to happen in Israel. And it all began with the hijacking and the kidnapping and killing of the 3 yeshiva students. And interestingly, it was for 18 days that we stood in uncertainty, right? And number 18 is Chai. And it was 18 days which we waited, and then it was on the second day of Tammuz, which their bodies were found. Well, last week, and because it was those 18 days where everyone was praying, and it really brought everyone together, so their passing was more painful perhaps than other tragedies, because, for 18 days the whole world was praying for them. Well, last week, there was a rabbi. His name is Rabbi Schneur. His father is one of the senior rabbis at Yeshiva University, and he is an assistant rabbi in a synagogue in New York. And the synagogue in New York decided that they wanted to send a representative to be Menachem Avel to comfort the mourners in Israel of these 3 boys. So they sent him, and he was on the plane, getting ready to take off. And the stewardess came over, and somehow she asked him, you're coming for a while? He said, no, I'm coming, I'm flying in, I'm arriving in the morning, and I'll be heading back in the evening. And he explained why he was going. He was going for one reason, which was to be Menachem Avel. And the stewardess, it was an Israeli, and she was very emotional. She heard that, she was really touched, and she started crying, and then she went to the front of the airplane to announce that I just want to let everyone know that on our flight we have someone who's just coming for the purpose of doing a mitzvah, and that's all. He's coming, he's flying to comfort the mourning families, and then he's flying back this evening. And she just wanted the people in the airline to hear about this. A few moments later, it seems that on that same flight there was also a birthright group. And one of the boys from the birthright group came up to the area where the rabbi was sitting, and he said, I got to tell you this, that message touched me. I'm really emotional about hearing this, that you're flying and you're flying back and forth, and all you're doing is going to comfort the mourners halfway across the world, and all you can think about is going to visit them and not doing any. And we all know you can have a great time in Israel, but that's not you. All you're going to is to do the mitzvah of comforting the mourners. You feel their pain to such a degree. He says, I want to do a prayer together. He says, I don't really, I want to do a prayer together. Could you help me put on a talit? So he said, the rabbi says, of course I can. He says, in fact, I'll help you. I also have a pair of tefillin I'll put on tefillin with you. So he said, yeah, let's put on tefillin. He put on the tefillin. He says, do you know the blessing? He tells the boy, let's do the blessing. He says, yeah, I know the blessing. And he pulls out a card which had a tefillat haderech, which is a traveler's prayer.
Yes.
And he says, yeah, I've been studying this for 3 weeks. And he starts saying the traveler's prayer. He says, no, that's not the blessing on tefillin. This boy really didn't even know the idea of a different blessing on tefillin. And again, they did the prayer together, and this boy was just excited and passionate about it. And then he turns to Rabbi and says, I just right. I love this prayer, this moment, this mitzvah. I wish I could do this more often. So there's another guy sitting right next to them who was watching all this. And he turns to the boy and says, you really ready to do this mitzvah more often? He said, yeah. He said, I'd love to. I mean, but tefillin is, very expensive. He says, you know what? I'll buy your pair of tefillin if you commit to wearing it every day. And the boy said, okay. So the man committed. He said, as soon as you get off, I'll make sure to buy you a pair of tefillin. So this is the story. And now, there's this guy. How do we know the story? Because the rabbi got off the plane, and he went straight to the house. The house was closed. The house of mourning was closed off to visitors for about an hour and a half. And he went into someone else's house, and he shared that story a couple moments after it happened. This is the idea of fireworks. A little bit, one source of light, one person doing a mitzvah. And you know what's unique? Is that sometimes the light of the fireworks, right? The reason why it starts at 10:15 at night is because sometimes it's precisely in the darkness where this light and the light which causes more light, which explodes into more light, can be so visibly seen. Sometimes it doesn't have to be this way. Sometimes it's a moment of darkness and a moment of great pain, which which we experience and are experiencing, which causes the light of one action to lead to another and to explode into many different sources of light. So that was just a thought in connection to a nice story emanating from the darkness, which I heard and wanted to share. Now, with that being said, let's study a little bit of Torah. But always before we study, we always open the floor first. If there's any questions, I know we've gone through a lot of portions of Torah, comments, questions, disagreements,
I have a comment
jokes.
about the three young boys who were murdered by the. When you read the idea, the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef, the death of the three boys succeeded to unite not just all the Jewish people in Israel, left, middle, and right. It united so many people throughout the world. And by us getting united, I think we will be very strong.
You say that again? You say?
By the Jewish people being united, we will defeat Hamas and all those people together. They achieved to unite the Jewish people by their death.
Right.
And it reminded me the concept of Mashiach ben Joseph.
Right. And it's interesting. You bring up a good. Well, go. You want to continue?
That's it.
No. She wants to. He wants you to explain further about Mashiach
You
ben
do,
Yosef.
Rabbi.
What?
You do the explanation.
Well, it's not exactly clear. I'm just getting the names. That's what I'm trying to do now. It says Mashiach ben Yosef is the first Mashiach which serves and may be killed for the purpose of bringing together the Jewish people so that the Mashiach ben David, the ultimate Mashiach, can come for the redemption. Right? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, and that's a Talmudic concept.
Yeah. But you mentioned three boys, so I do want to say like this. And you bring up a very important point. And that is that, we don't know the true value of life. We don't know. And we also believe that life doesn't end, right? Just because the body doesn't, the body may be discontinued, but the soul continues. But what you said is very valuable. That is, these boys were taken away in the prime of their lives, right? 16, 19 years old. But what they accomplished in their moments of death is as much and perhaps more than many people can accomplish in 80, 90 years of life. So if we look at life, it depends how you see life. If you look at life as just an opportunity to enjoy ourselves and to in whatever way we can indulge in the gifts of this world, then these people really didn't have that opportunity like everyone else. But if we see life as a mission, as we're sent here as souls to create, to make the world a holier place, to make the place a more godly place, a kinder place, that doesn't mean you have to suffer. We can do that while enjoying ourselves. But ultimately, the purpose of life is what we are, how we are changing the world around us. In that sense, these people, these young boys, live a very full life, fuller life than many people who live very long lives. So glad you brought that up.
I wish your thought was something I could embrace. My concern is that we've been studying, all the recent pashas, and here we are in Pinchas,
Yep.
and we're about to enter, and they've gone through all this, but we've seen all these miracles, and in Pinchas we see them go astray. They end up with women that aren't of the religion. The one man openly, brazenly takes a woman from another religion in front of everyone. It's a constant thing that everybody gets involved and everybody gets dedicated. But the problem we have is how quickly we forget. And one thing that concerns me is that a lot of the Muslims, they maintain their goal. We have a goal and we stay focused on the goal, but we wander from time to time. They stay more focused. And that's a concern I've always had. So I wish I could hold your thought and embrace it, that this will be a lightning rod and we'll strike and we'll win. But the problem is, in 3 months, will everybody still have the same fervor, the same feeling? You will, and some people will. But I wonder if everyone will. And I mean, throughout all these recent parshas we've done, we keep seeing the tests. And God gives us opportunity, and we go astray, and Moses saves us, and we go astray, and Moses saves us, and things happen. And
well, ultimately, what's the end to that story? They did enter Israel. No, the end is not that the end was that they accomplished what they set out to do. So yes, they had bumps in the road, but ultimately that very story you're talking about ended up with the goal they set out to achieve.
Joshua leads them in, and no question.
So in that sense, hopefully we're going to reach that goal real soon here too, even though we've had the ups and downs just like they did.
My fondest hope is that people will stay dedicated. They will stay on a path. They will understand the necessity. Even when we were in Israel, we heard some people say, I wouldn't give up certain rights to certain things for peace unless there was a guarantee. But there was some there that were already saying, look, I've grown up all my life. I've always had war around me. I've seen death around me. I'm tired. I'm willing to take a chance. And little by little, they forget some of the terrorists.
They took the chance when they gave back. When they gave
How
back.
many
God.
I don't think, I'm not.
All right, so I know. I see, because as we see, we're gonna. I want to study a little bit of this. It's connected to Pinchas. No. I'm glad you said what you said. But I want to share an idea which is going to connect to Pinchas.
We do this all the time,
and is going to connect to what's going on a little bit in Israel too. Don't be sorry. But I do want to dedicate today's learning to the memory of Yaakov Naphtali ben Avraham, Gilad Michael ben Ophir, and Eyal ben Uriel. May their neshama have an aliyah, and may our mitzvahs be attributed to them.
Amen.
In our Torah. In the end, towards the end of Pirkei Avos, chapter 1, we have a saying, or we have several sayings from one of the greatest sages in our history. In Metro Detroit, there is a Jewish day school. I think it's the biggest one that there is there. And it's named after a certain individual. His name was Hillel. Hillel.
Oh, he led school.
Hillel Day School. Hillel had a contemporary. Hillel's contemporary was Shammai. You're not going to find too many Shammai Day schools in the country. Or there's the Hillel. The Hillel is in every campus. There's
Well, is it
Hillel
Chabad,
and
the Shammai school?
What's that?
Chabad, it's not Shammai school?
It's not. I happen to have a cousin whose name is Shammai.
There
So
you
it
go.
is a name which is given, not very common, but it is a name, not nearly as common as Hillel. So, in chapter 1 of Pirkei Avos, it shares some of the sayings of Hillel. And one of the sayings is as follows. And this is, I believe, very important. And it's important to pay attention to what he's saying. Hu haya omer. Hillel says, Hillel v'Shammai kiblu mehem. Hillel and Shammai were the next link in the chain of Jewish tradition. Hillel Omer. Hillel says, Havei mi talmidav shel Aharon. Be from the students of Aaron. Aaron the high priest. One should be a student of Aaron. How should you be a student of Aaron? Ohev shalom, which means
Peace lover.
love peace. You have congregations called Congregation Ohev Shalom. And then he says, Rodef Shalom. What is Rodef Shalom? Pursue peace. Ohev et habriot. Love all creations. It doesn't say love all Jews. It says love all creations. Umekarvan la Torah, and bring them close to Torah.
This is Turkey about.
Yep. Chapter 1, Mishnah 12. I'm going to say it again because I don't think we're going to get past this in our discussion today. Hillel says, be from the students of Aaron the high priest. Love peace, pursue peace, love all creations, and bring them close to Torah. It's nice, right? It's a nice thing to say. But I'm going to ask several questions on this. There seems to be a lot of extra words in this Mishnah. Why does he have to tell us, be like this, be the students of Aaron? Why couldn't he tell us, love peace? I mean, this is a message which we can all relate to without being the students of Aaron. He could have said, Hillel Omer. Hillel says, love peace, pursue peace, love creations, and bring them close to Torah. Question number 1, right? Question number 2, what really is the difference between love peace and pursue peace? If you think, if you love peace, then that kind of includes both. What's the difference between love peace and pursue peace? And what's the 4th statement have to do with the first 3? Love peace, pursue peace, love people, and bring them close to Torah. I mean, that seems to be a separate message. Later, there's another paragraph of messages from Hillel. So, why is there's another this should be belongs to a different paragraph. The first, his statement seems to be about loving people, loving peace. What does bringing people close to Torah have to do with the first 3 statements of love, peace, pursue peace, love people? Those are my questions. Are there any thoughts on this Mishnah? Yes.
It seems like he's repeating V'haytem Mamlechet Kohanim. He's repeating, and you are a kingdom of priests. That's what reminds me what you just said. Teach Torah to everybody.
Right, but the Amlachas Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, that's what it says over there. I mean, I'm not sure, of course, imagine that includes all sorts of good things, but there's no indication that that's specifically connected to
No,
Ohev
it's a
Shalom.
to me with like a reminder.
Okay.
But Aaron's known as a
The
person-
compassionate man.
Yeah, a person that always wanted to make peace within the people.
Yes.
Right?
It was
And
compassionate.
it's not like they didn't give him a hard time,
Right.
especially at the golden calf.
Right.
There was the problem.
That's true, they mourn Aharon longer than Moshe?
Yes. It's not so much longer, it's that everyone mourned Aaron.
I see.
Men, women, everyone. For Moshe, it says it was only the men that mourned.
So they appreciate
Yeah.
what you tried to do.
Right.
If you're relating,
Anybody could think, perhaps express the difference between loving peace and pursuing
All,
peace?
all 3
Yes.
things are different, because you can do any of the 3 without doing the other 2. But all 3 come together because they can lead you to the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal here is the Torah. They're doing it through peace. You can have peace without pursuing peace. You can have somebody who wants peace but is not willing to work for it. You can have somebody who works toward peace, maybe doesn't love peace, but they work toward it as a goal, as no other choice. You can have somebody who loves all creatures, and he can love all creatures, but he doesn't have to have peace with others. All 3 are totally separate entities, but they all get linked together because the last one, bring all to Torah, is all these things can lead you there from different directions, but you can end up at the same place. The culmination can always be the
Culmination
same.
is the Kavan Torah. Okay, very
How's
nicely
that?
said. Very nicely said. I like that. Hey, are you going to say something when I said about no?
No, thank
Okay,
you.
so let me share my thoughts on
Go
this.
back to your first question.
Aaron. Why mentioning Aaron? Okay, that's where I'm going to start.
Um,
Yeah, go ahead.
It also says in Turkey about to find yourself a teacher.
Right?
And so they had to state who, they had to have a person. so that you could know about what he did. You know,
He's
so
the
that,
epitome.
But why can't Hillel be the teacher?
I don't
It's
know.
not his only statement. He says the very next Mishnah is another statement from him. And he doesn't say be like someone. Mishnah 13 he says, he used to say, he who seeks to advance his name loses his name.
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
Mishnah 13, I'm not spending too much time on it, but he says, he who seeks to advance his name loses his name.
I got you, thank you.
He who does not increase his knowledge in Torah decreases it. He who does not teach deserves death. He who makes use of the crown of Torah also no good. So, over there he doesn't give a person to compare it to.
Aaron's an icon.
Okay, how's that?
Isn't he like the beginning light, as you were referring to
Oh,
in the?
okay, so we'll answer these questions
Well,
one
will
at a
you
time, and
stop
we'll bring it
making
together.
those good comments?
There you go. You're right. Ah.
So the
So let's begin
disciples are
with one. Ohev shalom, rodev shalom. What's the difference between loving peace and pursuing peace? I think like this. I think the truth is most people love peace. I think peace is something which we naturally would want. Most people. It seems that there are people in the world who unfortunately love conflict and are drawn to conflict. But most people, I think, love peace. And that's his first statement, love peace. You should love it. You should maintain a level of peace within your lives. Try to be at peace with your contemporaries, all the people you know. Pursue peace is something else. Pursue peace is how much out of my way will I go to cause there to be peace around me, or peace between others. Love peace is more so, I should love peace. I should make sure to live a peaceful life. I should be peaceful with people around me. But pursuing is running towards something. That's what pursuing means. I think most people, or the natural reaction, if you are aware of a problem or a conflict between people, the most natural reaction is, it's none of my business. Especially if they didn't ask me for my advice. If you know that there's two people who are not getting along, have had an issue. Say you know that a certain man and woman are going through, they're husband and wife, and they're they didn't talk to you, they didn't ask you. There's a certain mentality that it's not my place to mix in. If they want me to help, they'll come to me to help. And then I'll help. Someone who pursues peace can't handle that there is a rift, and therefore will go out of their way to resolve it, even though there's a strong chance that by mixing myself in, I will be hurting myself, because the reaction will be, butt out, stay out of this, I have no interest. And I'm taking that risk. The risk of being pushed aside and saying, this is not your problem, stay away. Nevertheless, I'm willing to take that risk, because I pursue peace. Who's the example of this? Aaron. Aaron the high priest. Aaron the high priest was a master marriage counselor. But he didn't charge, and people didn't come to him. He would hear that there is a problem, it says, between a husband and wife, or between two friends. And what he would do is he would do the following. The Talmud says, what would Aaron do? He would find one of the two people and sit down with them and say, I heard from your spouse, or I heard from your friend, that there's a conflict, there's something, you guys are not getting along right now. But the truth is your friend, your spouse, feels terrible about it. They feel terrible, and they're just embarrassed to come to you directly and tell you, but they feel terrible about this fight, and they want to make up. They're just a little bit embarrassed to approach you. Even though that wasn't true. He had never heard anything from that side. And then he'd go to the other side and say the very same thing. He'd say to the other side, I've heard confidential information that your spouse or your friend really wants to make peace, wants to resolve this, wants to get back together, and just embarrassed, doesn't know how to say it. And you say this to both sides, and the natural reaction when one person hears that about the other is they reciprocate. And the Medrash says the next time they met one another, those two people, they would embrace and reconnect, resume that friendship as it was before. This is what Aaron did. Aaron went out of his way. Rodev Shalom is someone who runs to resolve problems, even if they're not my problems, even if most people say it's none of my business. It is my business. It absolutely is my business, because someone else's problem is my business. That's a much more difficult level to stay. Furthermore, an interesting lesson from that medrash which the Talmud brings is that Aaron, the high priest, was dishonest. It's what we call a white lie. Is it okay to say a white lie? Is it okay to ever lie? Some say no. Some ethicists in some walks of life say lying is always wrong. Any form of lack of truth is wrong and evil. Judaism doesn't agree with that. And we have to be very careful, because truthfulness is the seal of God. But we actually find this idea of bending the truth from God himself. What's the story where we see that God was said, quote unquote, a white lie? Goes back to the beginning of the Torah, when Abraham and Sarah were promised that they would have a son. So it says that the three angels came. If you know the story, you're more familiar. If not, we'll go through it quickly. The three angels came and promised Abraham. They said, "You should know, your wife next year, by this time next year, your wife will have a son." Now the verse says, Sarah, who was in the next tent, overheard what they said, and she laughed. Vatitzchak Sarah b'kirba lemor, that Sarah laughed to herself and said, "How can I have a child? Va'adoni zaken, my husband is too old." She laughed to herself and said, "My husband's too old." The very next verse, it says God had a conversation with Abraham. He says, "Why is it that your wife doesn't believe?" And your wife said, "How can we have a child if we are old?" The commentaries say that's not what she said. She said, "My husband's old." And when God repeats her thoughts to Abraham, he says that we are old. Well, God forgot what Sarah said. Is that what happened? Obviously not. So God changed it because he felt it would be better for their marriage if he didn't know exactly what Sarah said. So from here we see who greater to learn a lesson from other than God, that there may be circumstances, most specifically a circumstance of shalom bayit, peace in a home, where one may bend the truth a little bit, not say an outright lie, but bend the truth a little bit in order to cause peace within a relationship, specifically a relationship of a husband and wife. Now, of course, this is an area which is the ultimate slippery slope, right? Because a lie, of course. No, I wasn't in Vegas. No, I was at a business meeting. So there's all sorts of dishonesty that this doesn't include. Because the truth is, most times dishonesty will be revealed, or will lead not to peace, but will lead to more conflict. But there are circumstances, like the one of Aaron, where he told each side, the other one wants to make up. There are circumstances where what we would call a slight dishonesty may lead to a true peace, and if so, that's something which one can do. So the first message, and that's why it says Aaron. We ask, why does he mention Aaron? Because Aaron teaches us what this means. Hillel could have just said, love peace, pursue peace, love people. By quoting Aaron, he's explaining what that means. Aaron is the example of someone who ran after it, even if he didn't have a problem with his marriage. He wasn't, maybe Moshe did, but that's a separate story. He didn't have a problem with his marriage. He wasn't the one who had any issues. He could have said, look, I'm in good shape, and if anybody comes to me, I'll talk to them and I'll resolve it. But that wasn't his attitude. His attitude is, I know there's a problem, I know there's a conflict, I will do my part. I am a rodev shalom. I pursue peace. I don't just love peace. And that's difficult. This is, I'd say, one layer of understanding of it. And then I have a thought, which I don't know if I've seen it somewhere or not, but I think there's another message here, and it connects very much to Pinchas, who's in this week's Torah portion, and it connects very much to what's going on in Israel now. And that is like this. Let's see, how much time do we have? A little bit of time.
We have
okay.
whole night.
Whole night. I have to be out of here by 6 because the minyan in West Bloomfield is at 7 in the morning. So this week's Torah portion is about Pinchas, and I know Robert, you mentioned before about a little bit about it, but I'll share a little bit more. The story of Pinchas is last week, the end of the Torah portion, the Midianite women seduced the Jewish men to idolatry and to immorality. And a plague began to consume the Jewish people. One of the leaders of the Jewish people from the tribe of Shimon, his name was Zimri, and he himself was seduced to sin. Pinchas, who was the grandson of Aaron, the son of Eliezer, he did an act, a violent act, and he said he took a spear and he killed them. Both Zimri and the woman with whom he was with, whose name was
Rabbi Schneur says,
Cosby.
Kaba, both of them.
his Cosby.
That's what
So-
Schneur said. You should come up both of them.
So, now, here's the interesting point. What does God, that's the end of last week's Torah portion. What's the beginning of this week's Torah portion? God speaks to Moses saying, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, Heishiv es Chamasim Yal b'nei Yisrael, Pinchas the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, has calmed my anger, and therefore the plague will stop. Lochein, and therefore my blessing to him is, my gift to him, Hinini nosein lo, et, now I'm going to give him, Briti Shalom. I'm going to give him the covenant of peace. That's my blessing to Pinchas. The blessing of peace. What exactly is going on here? What's happening? What does it mean giving him the blessing of peace? What exactly does that even mean? The blessing of peace.
Blessing of peace or covenant?
Well,
Are they one and the same?
the covenant of peace, but that was the blessing. The blessing I'm giving him is the covenant of peace.
Is
Brisi
that the
Shalom.
first time that is mentioned?
I think so. I think so. Brisi Shalom. Yeah. What is it? But what is it? It's a nice word, but what is it? Is it a gift? I mean, there's certain gifts. God says, promises Abraham, I'll give you a child. Okay, that's clear. That's something. Yes.
Also, he did promise him the kahuna will be through him.
Yes.
The priesthood will be through.
That he would become a Kohen, by the way, too.
Yes.
So, what's going on here? And also, isn't it strange? If there's one thing, he did a courageous act, there's no question. But to call it, that God should say, give you the covenant of peace? Like by an act of murder? I mean, how is that peace? If anything, you could say, I'll give you the purple heart. I'll give you a covenant of bravery, of courage, of holiness. But the last word you would think to come to mind from such behavior would be covenant of peace. But I think therein lies something very deep. The Medrash tells us that when Pinchas carried out this act, the Jewish people as a whole were very unhappy with him. Before God responded and said, Pinchas has just done an act of valor, they were furious at him. Who do you think you are to take this in your act? It's not as if you brought them to court. You on your own, you went with a weapon and you acted violently. Perhaps it's because you have a streak of violence to yourself and you're using this as an excuse. And therefore God says, God's response is not just saying something. He was actually disputing all that the Jewish people at the time were saying. He says, no, you're all wrong. This was an act of holiness, and this was an act of peace. And I think that there's a very deep message to be understood over here. And that is that peace many times requires strength and actions which may seem at first glance to be unpeaceful. That when we talk about a lasting peace, sometimes it requires a show of strength to accomplish that. God was saying, despite the fact that externally it looked that Pinchas had just committed an act of violence, really, he had done an act of peace. Because the only way that there could have been peace among the Jewish people was if someone would do what Pinchas just did. And what Pinchas did, which was a forceful act, was something which was only for the sake of bringing peace to the people. And this message is so important because there is this philosophy, it's a very common modern idea that love and peace will just solve all problems. But that's not true. The fact is, today more than ever, we are aware of a very dark element in the world. A dark element which never existed before, this idea of terrorism. There's always been evil, but this idea of terrorism, which specifically target innocent people and make a religious war out of it, is a new issue. It's the world's biggest problem today. There's true evil out there. So just to assume that love and kindness and peace will just resolve everything, it may not be the truth in some circumstances. Sometimes there needs to be an act like Pinchas out of the pursuit of peace. And that's what I think may be a message, Rodef Shalom. Pursuing peace means sometimes doing things, not just to hope that peace will happen, but doing things which may seem unpeaceful for the purpose of peace. Sometimes, if someone is doing something wrong, sometimes the right thing to do is to embrace them and show only love. But there are times that in order to resolve a situation, it could be in a small setting like around a table. It could be in a larger setting like what's going on in Israel. Sometimes the path to peace, the Rodef Shalom, the pursuit of peace, requires unpeaceful actions, because that's the only way that peace will happen. Because we all know what's going on in Israel right now. And many people, as this happens all the time, that many news outlets and people just talk about the aggression and aggressive activity. Well, what they may not be, aggressive activity, Israel is bombing Gaza. What's not being mentioned is Israel stood silently for years upon years, in which daily rockets were being sent from the terrorists into their cities. And that's what you call peaceful. Just sitting quietly. That's what when we think of peace, we think of sitting quietly, letting the other. But that didn't resolve anything. It didn't lead to any state of peace. There are times, again, on a larger scale and a smaller scale, where in order to establish a lasting peace, it requires that someone speaks up. And again, it could be just speaking up. There's all sorts of levels of this. It could be speaking up at a table, saying, this is wrong, this has to stop, even though that statement may offend someone at the moment. But it doesn't matter. Right now, so that someone's doing something wrong, or there's something wrong happening, there is a time and a place to stand up forcefully and say, this has to stop. And that is, as God says, an act of peace, even though it seems to be unpeaceful. And that's the difference. That may be another message of Rodef Shalom. The Hebrew word Rodef, usually, by the way, the term Rodef, even though it literally means running after, in the Talmud, the word Rodef usually means someone chasing someone to kill them. The word Rodef, if you hear just the term, it says, he's a Rodef, means that he's running after someone to harm them. So the term Rodef almost has a negative connotation. And perhaps the idea is that sometimes peace requires actions which may seem to be unpeaceful in the pursuit of peace. Sometimes the pursuit of peace may not be the same as peace itself, but it is part of the pursuit of peace. And that's what God was saying about Pinchas. The act which seemed to be extremely aggressive, which seemed to come from hot-blooded, says that itself, my reward is in accordance to the act. My reward is the covenant of peace, because that act was not as it looked. That act was an act of peace. Interestingly, the Jewish people, it says, didn't, even though God said this, that Pinchas is peaceful, the Jewish people didn't really accept it until 15 years later. What happened 15 years later that caused them to look back and say, you know what? Pinchas is a man of peace. What happened 15 years later? This is in the last year of the Jewish people in the desert. A little while later, Moshe passed away. Moses passes away, and the Jewish people go into Israel. Who leads them into Israel? Joshua. Joshua leads them to Israel. But it was a long process until the Jewish people were settled into Israel. In fact, it was a process of 14 years. 7 years they had to conquer the land. There were some 31 kings they had to conquer the land of Canaan from. That was 7 years. And then the next 7 years was dividing the land. Also took a while to divide it between all the tribes and how it was done, which, by the way, is discussed in this week's Parsha, dividing it by a lottery. So that took 7 years. Took 7 years. Finally, 14 years later, the Jewish people are now all settled in the land. When this happened, the 2.5 tribes who had chosen to settle on the east bank of the Jordan, right? Those of you familiar with the Talmud, with the Bible, the 2.5 tribes who told Moshe, we like the east bank of the Jordan. Here's a little trivia. Who are the 2.5 tribes?
I don't know.
Half of Menashe?
I don't. I read it and I don't remember.
Reuven and Gad. Reuven, the tribe of Reuven, the tribe of Gad, and half of Menashe. And they had asked to settle on the east side of the Jordan. And Moses' response to them was, the only way you can settle on that side is if you go to battle with your brothers when they're conquering the west side of the Jordan.
That's right.
We call the West Bank is the West Bank of the Jordan. Really, we had the East Bank too. You know, we talk about the West Bank is the controversial area. The East Bank really was part of Israel. Not only the West Bank. Anyways, but so he says, if you go battle with them, then you can have the land on the East Bank. So they go to battle, and for 14 years they battle alongside their brothers, and then they head back home now that everything is settled. As they cross the Jordan, they decide, let's make a monument to celebrate that we're finally going home. Let's make a monument. And they built a monument. And at that the other 10 tribes saw this and were very angry because they saw this as a sign that they were trying to separate themselves. They're creating their own monument, their own altar, their own place of holiness as a form of separation between the 2.5 and the 9.5 or 10.5 tribes. So therefore, the assembly, it says an assembly from the 10.5 tribes gathered together, ready to wage war against the 2.5 tribes.
Already, yeah.
That's how long it took. Ready to wage war against the 2.5 tribes. Before they went to war, it was decided that a delegation would go to try to resolve the issue before it escalated out of control. Who was the delegation? The delegation was led by Pinchas. Pinchas led the delegation together with 10...
Pinchas was in Israel.
Yeah.
Wow.
Pinchas together with a member of each of the tribes in Israel, and he went there and he spoke to them. They had never intended to truly split up from the Jewish people. And they accepted him, and they spoke, and he spoke to them, and they resolved it peacefully. And he went back home, and he said, there's no reason to battle. We are not two separate nations. It is one nation. That monument was never intended to cause separation. It was just a monument of thanks. At that time, the Jewish people realized that Pinchas, because of that accomplishment, truly was a man of peace. And I think what's unique about that story is as follows. Why is it so? What's unique? It could have been, Pinchas would have done many things that were peaceful. You know, he could have done like Aaron, his grandfather, created happiness between the husband and wife. But no, there's something unique about the situation. That was that here was another circumstance in which if Pinchas was just an aggressive person, if the reason that he had killed Zimri and Cozbi was because he was a violent person, and he was just looking for excuses to express that violence, well then right here was another golden opportunity to have violence. In other words, here, if he was just a person who was aggressive, a person who was looking for opportunities to fight and blaming God for his aggressive nature, so then right here is an opportunity to incite the people. Not only that, he had the backing of the 10 tribes which were ready to battle. The fact that in this circumstance, Pinchas understood that, no, this now is not a time. Now, the pursuit of peace does not include violence. Now, the pursuit of peace is about mediation. And therefore, I'll mediate the problem. And he did. So the Jews recognize that all along, Pinchas had one goal in mind. In every circumstance, the circumstance of 15 years earlier, the circumstance here, Pinchas wanted to accomplish one thing. That was peace. But he was wise enough to know that peace doesn't come the same way every time. There are times in which peace needs to be pursued with a peaceful method, like it was when the tribes were at odds with one another. And there are times where peace requires a stronger stand and a display of strength and perhaps even a display of violence, like he did 15 years earlier. Only 15 years later did Jewish people realize that, even though God realized that immediately. It took the Jews 15 years later to realize that Pinchas was truly a man of peace. And it wasn't about him. You see, so if it's about me, so then if I'm a peaceful person, if I'm a softer person, I'll always be soft. If I'm a more aggressive person, I'll always be aggressive. But if it's about peace, so then whatever is necessary to pursue peace, I'll do. It's not about what my nature is. It's about what's needed right now. So therefore you can have two stories with Pinchas, each in which he did two opposite things. You know, you ask, what's his nature? Is his nature the mediating type or is his nature the aggressive type? The answer is it wasn't about him. It wasn't about his nature. It was about peace. And peace sometimes requires one, sometimes it requires the other. So he was a true pursuer of peace. And that's the real explanation for what goes on in Israel. There's always all sorts of talks, restraint, hold back. Maybe not. Hold back. All sorts of words from government officials. Hold back for the sake of peace. Sometimes holding back is not really for the sake of peace. And that's why the Torah portion says, "Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Lamer." God says to Moshe, saying, "Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron haKohen heishiv es Chamasim ya ben Israel." Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, is the one who has conned me and has brought peace. Why does it say Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron? We know who Pinchas is. We just heard him 2 verses ago. It says Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron. Now again, we have to repeat him, his father, and his grandfather's name. We know who he is. The Torah doesn't add words. But yes, the Torah is not telling us the son of Elazar, the grandson of Aaron, to identify him. The Torah is saying this Pinchas is the grandson and is following directly in the footsteps of his grandfather Aaron. The very same Aaron who says, love peace, pursue peace, love people, his grandson is following in his footsteps, even though he seems to be doing something else, but no, he is pursuing the very same thing Aaron pursued. Right now, it needs to be accomplished in a different way. And that's, my understanding, another way to see the difference between Ohev Shalom and Rodev Shalom. Someone who loves peace is someone who's a peace-loving person. Likes to be quiet. And those are good people. Those are the people you want to have as friends. But sometimes someone who pursues peace recognizes that the pursuit of peace sometimes requires uncomfortable actions, because I'm not just here to love peace, I'm here to pursue peace. And that may require different steps. This is just a thought on this mission. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, transliteration of that line, the opening line was, the priest Pinchas turned my anger
Right.
away from the sons of Israel, by bringing my rights to bear in their midst. Therefore, I shall give them my covenants of peace and
Right, that's
everlasting
what God
peace.
is saying. That.
Yeah, God's saying that. So, I never thought that what Pinchas did was wrong. He did it exactly what you said. That opening line, God's saying.
Because we look at the story in hindsight once we already know God's response.
Yeah,
but you have to realize there was a period of time before God responded, and there was real ganging up on him because he also the person he took out was a leader. He was a Nasi. He was a leader of the tribe of Shimon.
Nasi, yes.
So people started looking back at Pinchas's lineage and saying, oh, he has his parents, his grandparents, there's violence in his DNA, and we see that. Looking back, we should have seen this earlier, until God settled that with this statement. But it wasn't initially accepted very positive. So that's that.
The hard part is to know when.
The hard part is to know when. That's very true, and it's true, and that leads to the other statement which you brought up, which is a Selah Harab, that a person should never, in a situation where it's hard to know, that's why a person should always have a mentor, who they can ask, who they trust, who's a holier person, who would say, look, I don't know what right now is the best action to take. Perhaps you can direct me. And Pinchas actually first went to Moshe. He first approached Moshe about it. He didn't, Moshe says, this is your job, this is your shlichut, your mission. So that was that.
I think that it all points to you have to be really in tune to God to know which way to go, which action to do, for peace. It may
Yes.
mean a violent action, or it may mean...
Right, a peaceful action. Well, here's the story. I think that we are tuned into God.
No.
Right, but we have to realize we are tuned into God. We all have a godly soul within us. So we do have that God within us. Nevertheless, we also have an animalistic side. And that's why it's important to have, again, the very same chapter, we didn't get to that Mishnah. That would be another class, is that Mishnah. A Mishnah which says, Selah Harab, make for yourself a mentor. Everyone should have someone. It's not about someone who's not only a teacher, it's not just someone who teaches you information, but someone who, if I have a question of what's right or wrong, and I can't judge myself because I'm subjective, I can go to that person. Now that person also has to have a mentor. Everyone, even there's no one in the world who shouldn't have one, because everyone is going to be subjective to circumstances which they have to deal with. But yeah, that's why that message is important, because it is a very thin line. The very same action can be done as a look. The other story in the news this week was about an act of aggression which we strongly condemn, which was happened in Israel with those who took things in their own hands and killed an innocent person, and it was it was wrong. So that was also an act of aggression, but that was wrong. That wasn't pursuing peace. It didn't create any sense of peace. So yeah, it's important to be able to know what where the difference is.
Oh, Rabbi, when they're talking about the Midianim, Isn't it Abraham with Keturah have 6 kids, one of them was Midian? Am I wrong?
Could be. We can go back to that. Is one of them Midian? I think it's Midan. I wonder if that's Midian. I think it's Midan. But you have the whole Chumash. We can look at it.
You probably can find it faster than me.
Another thing that I thought was,
Today with you just put it into your phone.
Yeah, I know.
You ask Rabbi Google.
But you have 6 kids, one of them is Midian.
We'll find out.
Isn't it Jethro was from Midian?
Yes.
And then it is. So Abraham is the troublemaker.
Midian.
Midian. How is it in English? Midian?
Midian.
Media.
In Hebrew it's Midian.
Midian.
Oh, I have it on my Google.
You know, I said it was Midan.
Yeah.
It says that Abraham. You see, this is beautiful. Who's right? Is it you? Are you right or am I right? You said Midian. I
You're
said
right.
Midan.
You do Rabbi.
See, I'm right. Here's what it says: that he had the following children: Zimran, Yakshan, Midan,
Midan.
and Midian,
Oh my God.
and Yishbak and Shuach.
So Jethro, he was a priest for the Midianim.
Yeah.
He's a descendant of Keturah and Abraham.
Yeah.
Wow. What a beautiful Torah we have. Everything is in it.
Even both of our opinions, right?
another thing I liked at the end of, toward the end of this parsha was that Moses, right till the end, always did for others. When he was told he couldn't enter into Israel, he never complained, he never said anything bad.
Yeah.
His only concern was who would lead the people.
Yeah.
And that was his only concern, and you talk about the essence. You talk about the essence of man, what makes a mensch.
Sure. That's right.
I mean, that's the essence of it right there.
Absolutely.
To the point.
I thought that was a
No.
beautiful thing.
You're not going-
All right. So hopefully we'll do this again next month.
Next week?
Next.